March 14, 1986, 02:17 hours, San Francisco Bay, California. The fog lies low and heavy, pressing down on the water like a lid. Diesel fumes hang in the cold air, mixing with salt and metal. Somewhere beyond the pier lights, a shape begins to move, but the shape refuses to behave like a ship. It doesn't cut the water. It doesn't throw a wake. It simply slides, low and angular, as if the sea itself has decided to rearrange its geometry. On the deck, red lights glow dimly. Voices are hushed. Every man here knows the rule. This vessel does not exist. Commander Robert Bud Whitaker, U.S. Navy, stands near the starboard rail, collar turned up against the wind. He spent 23 years at sea, but nothing in his career prepared him for this moment. Watching a ship that looks more like a shadow than steel quietly detach from the pier. No flags, no markings, no hull number. Just a matte black silhouette made of sharp edges and deliberate silence. The ship's designation, spoken only in classified rooms, is IX-529. Its unofficial name is whispered instead, Sea Shadow. As the mooring lines are cast off, the water barely ripples. The engines don't roar, they hum, buried deep within the hull, masked, baffled, strangled into near silence. Even standing a few meters away, you feel it more than you hear it, an unsettling vibration that seems to sink into your bones. Above the fog, far beyond human sight, a Soviet early warning satellite sweeps its sensors across the Pacific coast. Infrared, radar, optical. The same system designed to spot American aircraft carriers halfway across the ocean. But tonight, it sees nothing. The Sea Shadow moves forward. From a distance, it doesn't look real. The hull angles inward instead of outward, forming a faceted catamaran-like structure that breaks radar waves instead of reflecting them. Every surface is tilted, calculated down to the degree, designed not for beauty or speed, but for absence. This ship is not meant to be seen. Whitaker glances at the men around him, engineers from Lockheed's Skunk Works, Navy test officers, civilian scientists whose names are buried under layers of classification. No one smiles, no one speaks. This is not a shakedown cruise. This is a proof of existence test, or more accurately, a proof of non-existence. If the Sea Shadow fails tonight, the Soviets will know. And if the Soviets know, decades of American naval doctrine collapse overnight. The ship clears the harbor mouth and enters open water. The Pacific rolls gently, long black swells rising and falling beneath the hull. A conventional destroyer would already be throwing white spray, its radar signature blooming like a flare. But the Sea Shadow rides low between its twin hulls, the central structure barely disturbing the surface. Onboard systems come alive. Radar test arrays extend briefly, then retract. Sensors begin recording. Every return, every stray reflection is logged, analyzed, stripped down to raw data. The numbers scroll silently across green-lit screens inside the operations compartment. One engineer mutters, barely audible, "Jesus, it's working." Whitaker doesn't respond. He's staring out into the darkness, imagining the other side of the world, Murmansk, Severomorsk, the Soviet Northern Fleet headquarters. Analysts in gray concrete buildings, officers trained to trust their instruments over their instincts. And tonight, their instruments are lying to them. The Sea Shadow was born from fear. Not fear of battleships or bombers, but fear of detection. By the late 1970s, the U.S. Navy understood something uncomfortable. The oceans were no longer big enough to hide in. Soviet satellites could track carrier groups. Over-the-horizon radar could see past the curvature of the Earth. Any major surface combat contender was now a glowing target, visible long before weapons range. So the Navy asked a forbidden question. What if a ship didn't look like a ship? The answer came from the same secretive design culture that produced the SR-31 Blackbird and soon would give birth to the F-117 Nighthawk. Lockheed engineers took radar theory meant for aircraft and dragged it, kicking and screaming, into the maritime world. The result was Sea Shadow, not a weapon, not a warship, a technology demonstrator. Its mission was simple and terrifying: prove that a surface vessel could vanish. Out here, 30 nautical miles off the California coast, the test reaches its critical phase. A U.S. Navy patrol aircraft begins a sweep, its radar active, its operators unaware of the exact target they're hunting. Inside the Sea Shadow, screens remain dark. No lock, no track, no contact. Whitaker exhales slowly. For the first time since leaving the pier, he allows himself to believe the impossible, that a ship floating on open water, surrounded by sensors designed to find it, has effectively ceased to exist. And somewhere above, the Soviet satellite passes on, blind and indifferent, its sensors sliding over empty ocean. History will never record this night, but naval warfare will never be the same. The patrol aircraft banks away, its radar sweep fading into the distance. Inside the Sea Shadow, no one cheers, no one celebrates. Success in this program is measured not in noise, but in silence. Commander Whitaker turns from the viewport and steps into the operations compartment. The room is cramped, angular, intentionally uncomfortable. Nothing on this ship is accidental. The walls slope inward, corners are avoided. Even the overhead fixtures are recessed at odd angles, all to prevent radar waves from finding a clean surface to bounce back from. At the center of the room, Dr. Elaine Porter, lead radar physicist from Lockheed, studies the data feed with intense focus. She's not a sailor. She spent her life in windowless labs, surrounded by chalkboards filled with equations most admirals would never understand. But tonight, the ocean is her laboratory. Radar cross-section is lower than projected, much lower, she says quietly. Much lower. Whitaker raises an eyebrow. How low? Porter finally looks up. Her voice drops. Comparable to a small fishing vessel, in some bands even less. That statement carries weight. During the Second World War, entire naval battles were decided by who appeared first on radar screens. Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf, the night actions where detection meant survival. Now, 4 decades later, the United States has crossed a line those wartime radar pioneers never imagined. The Sea Shadow is doing something unprecedented. It is manipulating reality. Radar works on a simple principle: emit energy, wait for it to return. Warships are perfect mirrors for that energy: tall superstructures, flat decks, right angles. The Sea Shadow rejects that logic entirely. Its surfaces are faceted like a cut gemstone, each plane carefully angled to scatter radar waves harmlessly away from their source. But shaping alone isn't enough. The hull is coated with experimental radar-absorbent materials, descendants of compounds first tested on stealth aircraft. Salt water, corrosion, constant wave impact, Everything about the maritime environment fights against these materials, and yet, layer by layer, they hold. Below the waterline, the deception continues. Traditional propellers churn the sea, leaving a frothing wake visible from aircraft and satellites alike. The sea shadow avoids this by using shrouded propulsors, carefully tuned to minimize cavitation. Even the exhaust is cooled and dispersed to blur infrared detection. Every system whispers instead of shouts. As the ship pushes farther into the Pacific, the test scenario escalates. A second aircraft joins the search, this one flying lower, switching frequencies, actively hunting for anything unusual. To its operators, the ocean appears normal, empty, deceptively calm. Whitaker imagines the scene from the other side, from a Soviet reconnaissance plane over the North Atlantic, scanning for NATO vessels. The same tactics, the same technology, and suddenly a blind spot. A blind spot big enough to sail a fleet through. The sea shadow was never meant to fight. There are no missile tubes here, no gun mounts, no armor. Its value lies entirely in what it represents. A future where surface ships no longer announce themselves with towering masts and spinning radars. For the U.S. Navy, this is nothing short of revolutionary. Since the age of sail, naval power has been about presence. Show the flag, dominate the horizon, be seen, and let that visibility intimidate. The sea shadow proposes the opposite philosophy: win by being unseen. As the dawn approaches, the fog begins to thin. Pale gray light bleeds into the sky, revealing the ship's bizarre form in clearer detail. From certain angles, it still looks unreal, like a prop from a science fiction film accidentally dropped into the real world. Whitaker steps back onto the deck. The sea is calm now, long swells rolling under the twin hulls. He thinks about history, about the first ironclads, about submarines dismissed as cowardly weapons, about radar itself once viewed as unreliable novelty. Every time, the same pattern repeats. A new technology appears, old doctrines resist. Then, suddenly, everything changes. Back in the operations room, Porter receives confirmation from shore. Ground-based radar stations along the California coast, among the most sensitive in the world, have failed to acquire a solid track. The sea shadow is officially invisible. But invisibility brings its own danger. What happens, Whitaker asks quietly, when they figure it out? Porter doesn't hesitate. Then everyone builds one. That is the unspoken truth behind this ship. It is not a secret forever. The Soviets are not fools. Their scientists are just as capable, their engineers just as driven. Somewhere in Moscow, design bureaus are already wrestling with similar problems: how to defeat radar, how to confuse satellites, how to hide steel on open water. The sea shadow's real mission, then, is not concealment. It is time. Time for the United States fleets to adapt. Time to rethink destroyers, cruisers, even aircraft carriers. Time to prepare for a naval battlefield where detection is fleeting, uncertain, and lethal. As the sun rises fully over the Pacific, the ship turns back toward port. To anyone watching from afar, it appears late, emerging from the sea as if it had materialized out of nothing. By nightfall, it will vanish again. And far across the world, Soviet analysts will pore over their data, troubled by empty patches of ocean that should not be empty at all. Gaps that hint at a truth they cannot yet prove. A truth floating quietly in American waters. Thousands of miles away, in a reinforced concrete complex outside Moscow, the night shift is ending. It is March 15th, 1986, 09:40 hours, Moscow Standard Time. Colonel Anatoly Grishин of the Soviet Navy's main intelligence directorate leans over a glowing table of satellite readouts. The room smells of stale coffee, ozone, and cigarette smoke. Above him, fluorescent lights hum with bureaucratic indifference. The Cold War does not look dramatic from here. It looks like numbers, grids, and patience. Grishин has spent his career trusting machines. Since the late 1970s, Soviet ROSAT and EORSAT satellites have given Moscow something it never had before: the ability to watch the world's oceans continuously. U.S. carrier groups, once ghosts, now leave unmistakable signatures: heat, radar reflections, patterns of movement that betray their presence even under cloud cover. Except today. A technician clears his throat. "Comrade Colonel, there is an anomaly." Grishин doesn't look up. "Define anomaly." The technician points to a section of the Pacific coast. Repeated satellite passes, multiple sensor bands, no corresponding surface contacts. Grishin straightens slowly. Empty ocean is normal, but consistent emptiness in the wrong place is not. "Could be weather interference," another officer suggests. Grishин shakes his head. Weather leaves fingerprints. He knows this because the ocean never lies. It reflects, it glows, it moves. Ships disrupt that order. Even the most disciplined American formations leave trails: thermal wakes, radar scatter, disturbances that persist long after hauls have passed. Yet here, the data shows nothing. Grishин taps ash into a tray and studies the overlays. Infrared sensors show no heat bloom. Radar returns are indistinct, collapsing into background noise. Optical systems, degraded by haze, reveal only a blank gray sheet of sea. To a junior analyst, it looks like a system glitch. To Grishin, it feels like intent. The Soviet Union has encountered this before, not at sea, but in the air. In 1981, Soviet radar stations began reporting strange phenomena over Eastern Europe: contacts that appeared briefly, then vanished, aircraft that seemed to defy known physics. Moscow dismissed them as errors. Then came intelligence from the Americans themselves, hints of a new aircraft, a stealth fighter, built to be invisible to radar. Now, Grishin wonders if that sickness has spread. The Americans, he knows, do not innovate in isolation. Every breakthrough ripples outward. If they can hide an airplane, why not a ship? Back in California, the sea shadow rests once more inside its secure enclosure, shielded from prying eyes by hangar walls and classification stamps. The test data is already being analyzed, conclusions drawn, briefings for admirals who will pretend not to be astonished. The verdict is clear: Soviet satellites failed completely. Not partially, not intermittently, completely. This failure exposes a foundational weakness in Soviet naval doctrine. Their entire strategy relies on early detection: spot the enemy, track him, shadow him, threaten him with massed firepower. Remove detection, and the system collapses. For the first time since nuclear parity was achieved, the United States holds an asymmetric advantage at sea. But the sea shadow also exposes something else: how fragile invisibility truly is. Soviet satellites were designed to find big things: carrier decks, cruiser hulls, formations. Sea shadow is small, experimental, deliberately unnatural in shape. It does not behave like the targets those systems were built to detect. Grishin orders a deeper analysis. Retask the satellites, change angles, change frequencies. The next passes yield the same result: nothing. The absence becomes undeniable. Within weeks, classified reports circulate through the upper echelons of the Soviet Navy. Phrases appear with increasing frequency: low observable surface vessel, radar scattering geometry, non-traditional hull forms. Design bureaus in Leningrad and Nizhny Novgorod receive quiet inquiries. Could such a thing be built? At what cost? With what materials? The answers are uncomfortable. The Soviet Union is already strained, economically, technologically, politically. Matching American stealth advancements at sea would require resources it no longer has. The Sea Shadow has not fired a shot, it has not threatened a fleet, and yet it has forced the Soviet Navy into a defensive posture, one built on uncertainty and fear of the unseen. For Grecian, the realization is personal. He looks again at the empty ocean on his screen, knowing that somewhere out there, something moved without permission, without acknowledgement, without leaving a trace. That is the most dangerous kind of enemy, because you cannot plan for what you cannot see. And as the Cold War grinds on towards its quiet, exhausted conclusion, the Sea Shadow remains a warning, proof that dominance is no longer about who has the biggest ships, but who can erase themselves from the battlefield entirely. The Americans will not deploy it, they will not speak of it, they will not need to. Its existence alone has already changed everything. By the summer of 1986, the Sea Shadow slips back into obscurity. It does not join a fleet. It does not receive a crew rotation. It does not earn battle streamers or headlines. Instead, it returns to its role as a quiet laboratory, its hull inspected, its coatings measured, its data fed into briefing rooms so classified that even their locations are omitted from official records. To the outside world, nothing has changed, but inside the Pentagon, naval thinking is already shifting. Rear Admiral James Halloway, head of Surface Warfare Development, studies the Sea Shadow's test results late into the night. On his desk are photographs of traditional destroyers, tall, bristling with antennas, unmistakable on radar. Next to them are grainy images of the Sea Shadow, its unnatural angles defying decades of design instinct. Visibility, Halloway mutters, has become a liability. For nearly a century, naval architecture evolved around firepower and endurance. Radar, once a revolutionary advantage in World War II, had become a double-edged sword. The same emissions that let you see the enemy announced your position to anyone listening. The Sea Shadow proves a radical counter-argument. A ship does not need to see in order to survive. It needs to avoid being seen. From this realization, a lineage begins. Design teams quietly revisit future projects. Hull shapes flatten, superstructures shrink, angles replace curves. Radar signatures become line items as important as speed or armament. The lessons learned from the Sea Shadow bleed into programs that will later define modern navies. Years from now, sailors will stand on the decks of Zumwalt-class destroyers, unaware that the ghost ship of the 1980s is embedded in the steel beneath their boots. They will marvel at how massive vessels appear on radar as something no larger than a fishing boat. That idea was proven here by a ship that never fired a weapon. As the Cold War winds down, the Sea Shadow's purpose fades. The Soviet Union collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Satellites still orbit, still watch, but the enemy they were designed to track dissolves into history. And so the Sea Shadow becomes an anachronism, too strange to deploy, too valuable to scrap. In the 1990s, its existence is finally acknowledged, carefully, in sanitized reports and brief press releases. Photographs emerge. The public sees it for the first time and reacts with confusion. Is it real? Is it a prototype? Why does it look like that? What the public does not see is what truly matters, the invisible war it already won. Commander Whitaker, now retired, stands years later on a coastal bluff, watching conventional ships move across the horizon. Their wakes gleam white in the sun. Their radars spin openly. They are powerful, visible, honest. He knows better. Somewhere, designs exist that will never be shown until they must be used. Shapes that will not announce themselves. Systems that will watch silently while remaining unseen. The sea shadow was never meant to be the future. It was meant to prove the future was possible. And in doing so, it taught every navy on Earth a final, unsettling lesson. The most dangerous warship is not the one you can see approaching. It is the one that was already there and left without a trace. The sea shadow does not sink into the ocean or vanish in an explosion of secrecy. Instead, it decays quietly. By the early 2000s, the once classified ghost ship sits moored and forgotten, its black coatings faded by sun and salt, its revolutionary angles now photographed by tourists who have no idea what they are looking at. To them, it is a curiosity, an odd relic of a strange design phase. To naval strategists, it remains a warning, because the world the sea shadow predicted has arrived. Modern battlefields are no longer dominated by massed fleets or visible armadas. They are shaped by sensors, signatures, and data fusion. Satellites track heat blooms in seconds. Drones loiter for days. Artificial intelligence compares radar noise against decades of stored patterns. And yet, despite all of this, stealth still works. The philosophy born aboard the sea shadow now defines modern naval survival. Ships reduce emissions. Radars operate in passive modes. Entire task forces maneuver under the assumption that being detected first is a death sentence. What the Soviets feared in 1986 has become doctrine. In Pentagon briefings today, the sea shadow is rarely mentioned by name, but its DNA is everywhere. In the faceted superstructures of modern destroyers, in the obsession with radar cross-section reduction, in the quiet acknowledgement that naval dominance no longer comes from size alone, it comes from ambiguity. The sea shadow proved something deeply uncomfortable for every navy on Earth. The ocean is no longer transparent. It can be manipulated, lied to, deceived. And that truth has consequences. Because when detection is uncertain, decision-making slows. When tracking is unreliable, confidence erodes. When enemies know something might be there but cannot prove it, fear replaces certainty. That is how wars are prevented and how they are won. The sea shadow never went to war. It never fired a shot. It never flew a flag in foreign waters. But it forced an entire superpower to stare at an empty ocean and wonder what it was missing. And in naval warfare, that doubt is more powerful than any missile.